goes, it's Elvis. And I mean, I knew right then and there that something horrible had happened. And then when he told me that he was dead, it was like...
For 30 years, Dick Grob, head of Elvis's security, kept a dark secret about the king's death at Graceland. Now, burdened by decades of silence, he's ready to reveal the sad truth. Could the real story about that tragic night have saved Elvis and countless other lives? Join us as we expose the devastating truth they tried to hide. The guard who couldn't stay silent anymore. Dick Grob was not just another face in the crowd surrounding Elvis Presley. From 1970 until that devastating day in August 1977, he served as the head of Elvis security, a position that placed him closer to the king than almost anyone else. While the world saw the glittering jumpsuits and heard the magnificent voice, Dick saw everything that happened behind the closed doors of Graceland. He witnessed the private moments, the struggles, the pain that Elvis hid from his millions of adoring fans. His role went far beyond simply protecting Elvis from overeager crowds. Dick became a confidant, someone Elvis trusted with his deepest fears and darkest moments. He was there during the sleepless nights when Elvis would wander the halls of Graceland like a ghost. He was there when the prescription bottles lined up like soldiers on the bathroom counter. He was there when Elvis would break down crying, missing his mother who had passed away years before. Dick saw it all, and like every other member of the Memphis Mafia, he took an oath to protect Elvis's image forever. The Memphis Mafia, that loyal group of friends and employees who surrounded Elvis, lived by an unspoken code. They would guard Elvis's secrets with their lives. They would maintain the legend no matter what truth they witnessed. When they stood together and promised to protect the king's legacy, they meant it absolutely. Even death would not release them from that vow. And for decades, it held firm. Dick remembered that phone call like it happened yesterday. August 15, 1977, the night before the world would lose Elvis Presley. The voice on the other end was urgent, panicked, demanding that he come to Graceland immediately. Something terrible was unfolding, something that would require all of them to make choices that would haunt Dick for the rest of his life. That night marked the beginning of a cover-up that would last 3 decades. Over the years, the burden grew heavier. Dick watched as millions of fans mourned Elvis, celebrating his memory while knowing only half the story. He attended funerals of other Memphis Mafia members who took their secrets to the grave, men who passed away still protecting what happened in those final days. Red West, Sonny West, Joe Esposito. One by one they passed away, their lips sealed forever. Each death added more weight to Dick's conscience. The guilt became unbearable. Dick began to wonder if their silence had done more harm than good. As more celebrities passed away in similar circumstances, as addiction claimed. More lives. As families struggled to understand what happened to their loved ones, Dick questioned whether the truth might actually save lives instead of destroying a legacy. The cover-up that seemed so necessary in 1977 now felt like a betrayal of everyone who needed to hear Elvis's real story. What finally pushed Dick to break his silence was the death of Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's only daughter, in January 2023. She struggled with the same demons that consumed her father, and when she passed away, something inside Dick shattered completely. He realized that protecting lies had not honored Elvis at all. It had only allowed the same patterns to continue, claiming more victims across generations. The time for truth had finally arrived, no matter how painful it might be. Now, sitting with those old photographs spread before him, Dick Grob prepared to reveal everything. The secrets that 7 men had protected for 30 years would finally come to light. What happened next would trap Elvis in a golden cage of his own fame, where prescription substances became his only escape, and Graceland transformed from a dream mansion into a prison that slowly destroyed the king from the inside out. The golden cage of Graceland, Dick Grob walked through the famous gates of Graceland for the first time in 1970, expecting to see the glamorous world that magazines and television showed to millions of fans. Instead, what he discovered behind those gates shocked him to his core. The mansion was beautiful. Yes, with its white columns and sprawling grounds. Yes, with its white columns and sprawling grounds. But something felt deeply wrong. The air inside carried a heaviness, a sense of decay hiding beneath the expensive furniture and gold records on the walls. Then Elvis appeared at the top of the grand staircase, and Dick struggled to hide his reaction. This was not the lean, electrifying performer the world knew. At just 35 years old, Elvis looked like a man 20 years older. His face was bloated, his eyes exhausted and distant. He moved slowly down the stairs, each step seeming to require enormous effort. This was the king of rock and roll, and he looked like he was dying. Life inside Graceland operated on a schedule that would seem insane to normal people. Elvis slept throughout the entire day, his bedroom windows covered with heavy blackout curtains that kept out every trace of sunlight. He would wake around 9 or 10 at night, just as the rest of the world was going to bed. His life had become completely nocturnal, trapped in eternal night. He would stay awake until dawn, watching television, reading strange books, or just wandering the mansion like a ghost haunting his own home. The isolation was suffocating. Elvis could not go anywhere without causing complete chaos. A simple trip to the grocery store would result in crowds and pandemonium, so he stopped going out at all. Graceland became his entire world, a beautiful prison that he could never escape. The gates that kept fans out also kept Elvis trapped inside, cut off from normal human experiences that everyone else took for granted. What Dick noticed immediately was the pills. They were everywhere. Bottles lined the bathroom counters, filled nightstand drawers, and appeared in every room Elvis occupied. He called them his medicine, but these were not vitamins or simple painkillers. Elvis had uppers to give him energy for performances, downers to help him sleep, painkillers for his various health problems, and pills to counteract the side effects of other pills. It was a pharmaceutical nightmare. Dr. George Nicopolis, who everyone called Dr. Nick, provided most of these prescriptions. He was Elvis's personal physician, always available, always willing to write another prescription for whatever Elvis requested. If Elvis wanted something to wake him up, Dr. Nick prescribed it. If Elvis needed help sleeping, Dr. Nick had pills for that too. The doctor never seemed to say no, never seemed to worry about the dangerous combinations or the quantities that would alarm any responsible physician. Elvis did have real health problems that required medical attention. He suffered from glaucoma, which affected his vision and caused pain. His blood pressure was dangerously high. His colon was enlarged, causing constant discomfort. His liver showed signs of damage from years of medication misuse. But instead of addressing these issues properly, the solution always seemed to be more pills, creating a vicious cycle that pushed Elvis closer to disaster. His behavior became increasingly bizarre. Elvis would suddenly pull out a gun and fire at the television if something on the screen angered him. Multiple televisions in Graceland had bullet holes in them. He gave away Cadillacs to complete strangers on random impulses, sometimes handing over the keys to people he had just met. He talked constantly about death, spirituality, and the occult, filling his room with books about mysticism and the afterlife. He was searching desperately for meaning, for something beyond the fame and wealth that had failed to make him happy. Paranoia consumed him. Elvis became convinced that someone would try to assassinate him, which was why Dick and the security team maintained constant presence. Elvis trusted almost no one, always wondering if people wanted him for his money or fame, rather than caring about him as a human being. The sad truth was that he was probably right to be suspicious, because genuine relationships became nearly impossible for someone at his level of fame. His marriage to Priscilla collapsed in 1973. She had finally had enough of the substances, the other women, the nocturnal lifestyle, and the complete control Elvis demanded over her life. The divorce devastated Elvis, even though his own behavior had destroyed the relationship. He lost one of the few people who had known him before the fame became all-consuming. Dick received clear instructions from the Memphis Mafia about his role. He was to protect Elvis's image as carefully as he protected Elvis's physical safety. If Elvis was too high to function, they hid it. If Elvis behaved strangely, they explained it away. If outsiders asked questions, they lied. The entire operation existed to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, even as everyone inside Graceland watched Elvis slowly destroying himself. The worst part for Dick was feeling completely powerless. He could see the decline accelerating month by month. He knew the substances were weakening Elvis. He understood that the isolation and enabling were making everything worse. But what could he do? Elvis was surrounded by people who made fortunes from his continued performances, people who needed the money to keep flowing regardless of the cost to Elvis's health and happiness. By 1977, the situation inside Graceland had become truly desperate, and when Colonel Parker forced Elvis back on tour despite his devastating condition, everyone in the inner circle knew they were watching a man stumble toward his final curtain. But the show had to go on no matter what horrors unfolded behind the stage. The final tour and the warning signs. June 1977 in Omaha, Nebraska. Dick Grobb stood in the wings of the stage, watching something that made his stomach turn. Elvis Presley shuffled onto the stage wearing a white jumpsuit that could barely contain his massive body. He weighed over 250 pounds now, his face so swollen that he barely resembled the young man who had changed music forever. The audience cheered wildly, thrilled to see their idol, completely unaware they were watching a man dying right before their eyes. Elvis grabbed the microphone and started to sing, but something was terribly wrong. He forgot the lyrics to songs he had performed thousands of times. His words slurred together, barely understandable. He moved in slow motion, as if walking through water, each gesture requiring enormous effort. Yet the crowd kept cheering, kept screaming his name, interpreting his struggle as part of the show. They had no idea this was not an act, but a tragedy unfolding in real time. The tour schedule was absolutely brutal. Colonel Parker had Elvis performing dozens of concerts, despite his obvious deteriorating health. The truth was that Parker was desperate for money. He had gambling debts and financial problems that required Elvis to keep working no matter what. So the aging, sick man was dragged from city to city, propped up on stage, and squeezed for every dollar he could generate. It was exploitation disguised as entertainment. Elvis's physical transformation over the past year shocked everyone who saw him. His weight had ballooned dramatically as his activity level decreased, and his medication affected his metabolism. His face was puffy and pale. His movements were slow and labored. Sometimes he had to sit on a stool. During performances, because he lacked the strength to stand for an entire concert, the mighty performer who once electrified audiences with his energy and charisma now struggled to simply remain upright. The performances became increasingly painful to watch. Elvis would forget where he was in a song and stop singing entirely. He would ramble between numbers, making bizarre speeches about religion and government conspiracies that left audiences confused and uncomfortable. His mood swings were dramatic and unpredictable. He might rage at band members one moment, then break down sobbing the next. The paranoia and delusions that plagued him at Graceland followed him on the road. Just getting Elvis onto the stage required ever-increasing doses of medication. The uppers he took to have enough energy were so strong that he vibrated with artificial energy, his hands shaking, his speech racing. Then after the show, he needed massive amounts of downers to calm down enough to sleep. It was a pharmaceutical roller coaster that was destroying his body and mind simultaneously. Backstage was where the real horror happened, away from the cheering crowds. Elvis would collapse after concerts, sometimes unable to walk to his dressing room. The Memphis Mafia would physically carry him, supporting his weight between them. They covered for him constantly, making excuses when he forgot lyrics, explaining away his slurred speech, creating reasons for why he had to sit during performances. They had become experts at lying. Photographers who managed to capture unflattering images found themselves approached by Memphis Mafia members with cash offers for the negatives. The goal was to prevent any pictures showing Elvis's true condition from reaching the public. The code of silence was maintained with military precision. Everyone understood that their jobs and income depended on protecting the illusion, so they all participated in the cover-up without question. A documentary crew filmed concerts in Omaha and Rapid City that June for a special called Elvis in Concert. The footage was shocking, showing Elvis forgetting lyrics, mumbling incoherently, and moving like a sick old man. Even with editing to hide the worst moments, the final documentary revealed how far Elvis had fallen. Yet it would not air until after his death. One final piece of evidence of what everyone chose to ignore. Dick and the other security members had quiet conversations among themselves during the tour. They all shared the same terrible certainty that Elvis would not survive the summer. His health was failing rapidly, his substance use was out of control, and nothing anyone said seemed to make any difference. They had an emergency plan in place for when he finally collapsed and did not get back up, because they all knew it was not a question of if, but when. Dick tried arguing with Colonel Parker, suggesting that the tour be canceled so Elvis could get help and rest. Parker refused to even consider it. The money had to keep coming. The shows had to continue. Elvis was a product, a money-making machine, and Parker intended to squeeze every last dollar out of him regardless of the human cost. Dick realized with horror that they were all complicit in slowly weakening Elvis Presley. The tour finally ended, and Elvis returned to Graceland for what would be his final days. But the night of August 15th brought something even more devastating than anyone expected. A confrontation that would change everything and force the Memphis Mafia to make choices that would haunt August 16th. The day the music passed away, Dick Grobb sat in the interview chair, his hands clasped tightly together, preparing to say the words that would destroy the official story. His voice was quiet but firm as he made his confession. He was already at Graceland when Ginger found Elvis. The timeline that the world had believed for 30 years was completely wrong. Everything that followed was a carefully staged production designed to hide what really happened. The truth was so much worse than anyone imagined. According to the official story, Ginger Alden woke up around 2 in the afternoon on August 16th and discovered Elvis unresponsive in the bathroom. She called for help, the ambulance was summoned, and Elvis was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. That was the narrative that appeared in every newspaper, every biography, every documentary about Elvis's death. But Dick was revealing now that this timeline was fiction. Dick had received that panicked phone call in the early morning hours, long before 2 in the afternoon. When he arrived at Graceland, Elvis was already in terrible condition. The details Dick provided painted a horrifying picture. Elvis had not been found in the bathroom as reported. The true location of his discovery was different, and the condition of his body suggested he had been dead for many hours already. Yet somehow, emergency services were not called until that afternoon. The delay was intentional and calculated. Before any ambulance could be summoned, before any official record could be created, the Memphis Mafia worked frantically to stage a scene. They cleaned and rearranged the master bedroom and bathroom. Items were removed and hidden, including prescription bottles and substance paraphernalia that would raise uncomfortable questions. Things were placed carefully to support the narrative they had agreed upon the night before. Dick overheard a conversation between Dr. Nick and Colonel Parker that revealed the extent of the cover-up. They discussed how to handle the medical examination, what findings should be emphasized, what details should be minimized or ignored completely. There was talk of managing the medical examiner, of ensuring that the official cause of death would be acceptable and would not destroy Elvis's legacy or expose anyone to legal consequences. The most devastating truth that Dick revealed involved evidence suggesting Elvis may have deliberately taken his own life. There had been a note, handwritten by Elvis in his final hours, but it was found and immediately destroyed before anyone outside the inner circle could see it. What that note said would never be known, but its existence and destruction pointed toward a terrible conclusion that everyone wanted to avoid. In his final days, Elvis had made statements to multiple people about wanting to join his mother. Gladys had passed away in 1958, and Elvis had never recovered from losing her. He talked constantly about being reunited with her, about ending his suffering, about escaping the trap his life had become. These were not casual comments, but expressions of genuine desperation from a man who saw no way out. The combination of substances found in Elvis's system was not accidental. Dick knew this because he had witnessed Elvis researching substance interactions in the days before his death. Elvis had been reading medical texts, asking questions about what combinations would be fatal, gathering information with disturbing purpose. The specific mix of medications in his body on August 16th could not have happened by chance or normal use. Elvis had also been putting his affairs in order. He updated his will just weeks before his death, making sure his estate would be properly managed. He had conversations with Lisa Marie that seemed like goodbyes. He gave away possessions to people he cared about, as if preparing for a departure. All the classic warning signs of someone planning to end their life were there, but everyone around him was too invested in keeping him working to truly see what was happening. The decision was made at the highest levels to never reveal any suspicion of homicide. Colonel Parker understood that homicide would devastate Elvis's legacy and could impact the continuing commercial value of his name and image. Dr. Nick knew that questions about Elvis deliberately overdosing would expose his role in providing the medications. The Memphis Mafia knew their own complicity would be examined if the truth emerged, so they crafted the bathroom narrative together. They coached Ginger on what to say, helping her align her traumatized memories with the story they needed told. They gathered all the Memphis Mafia members and secured their agreement to maintain this version of events forever. They applied pressure to the medical examiner to report findings that supported accidental death from cardiac arrhythmia related to prescription substance use, avoiding any mention of homicide or the specific substance combinations that suggested intent. For Dick, seeing Elvis's body and knowing they had all failed him was the worst moment of his life. They had prioritized protecting an image over protecting a human being. They had enabled his destruction while pretending to care about him. And now they were covering up the manner of his death to preserve their own interests and the commercial legend they had all profited from. The guilt of prioritizing image over truth would haunt Dick for 30 years. He came to believe that hiding the possibility of homicide had prevented honest discussions about depression and addiction that might have saved other lives. How many other celebrities followed similar paths, enabled by people around them, dying in circumstances that were covered up or explained away? The pattern continued because people like Dick stayed silent. But Elvis's death was only the beginning of the secrets that would be buried, because the Memphis Mafia had hidden far more than just the manner of his death, and the full scope of what they covered up would reveal a darker picture of the king than his most devoted fans could ever imagine. The secrets they buried with the king, Dick Grob, stood among the mourners at Elvis's funeral on August 18, 1977, watching as the copper casket was slowly sealed. Inside lay the body of the king of rock and roll, but Dick knew they were burying far more than just a man. They were burying secrets, lies, and truths that would remain hidden for 3 decades. Around him stood the other Memphis Mafia members, and without speaking a word, they all shared the same unspoken understanding. What they knew would go to their own graves, or so they believed in that moment. The manner of Elvis's death was just the beginning of what they concealed. Elvis's relationships with underage girls extended far beyond his well-known involvement with 14-year-old Priscilla. Throughout his career, Elvis showed a disturbing pattern of pursuing teenage girls, some as young as 14 or 15. The Memphis Mafia facilitated these relationships, bringing girls to Graceland and hotel rooms, ensuring that no parents or authorities ever found out. It was an open secret within the inner circle, but carefully hidden from the public. In his final years, Elvis suffered from severe sexual dysfunction that humiliated and devastated him. The combination of prescription substances, health problems, and psychological issues left him unable to perform sexually. This failure tormented Elvis, who had built part of his identity around his sexuality and appeal to women. The king who had once driven women wild could no longer function as a man, and this private humiliation deepened his depression substantially. Despite his obsessive reading about religion and spirituality, Elvis was experiencing a profound spiritual crisis. His faith, which had once sustained him through difficult times, was crumbling. He questioned everything he had believed, wondered if God existed at all, and felt abandoned by any higher power. Yet publicly, he still wore his cross necklace and talked about his Christian beliefs. The internal battle between his religious facade and his loss of faith left him feeling even more alone. Elvis had also begun experimenting with harder substances beyond his prescription pills. While the Memphis Mafia carefully maintained the narrative that Elvis only took medications prescribed by doctors, the truth was that he had started using cocaine and other street substances in his final year. These substances, combined with his massive prescription substance intake, created a devastating chemical combination. His behavior toward Ginger and previous girlfriends included violent outbursts that were carefully concealed. Elvis would explode in rage, throwing things, breaking furniture, and occasionally becoming physically aggressive. These incidents terrified the women involved, but were always smoothed over with apologies, gifts, and promises to change. The Memphis Mafia would clean up the evidence and ensure that no one outside the inner circle ever learned about these episodes. Elvis had also developed a paranoid belief that Colonel Parker was actively trying to take his life. He told several Memphis Mafia members that he suspected Parker of poisoning his food or tampering with his medications. Whether this paranoia had any basis in reality remained unclear, but Elvis genuinely believed that the man who controlled his career wanted him dead. Perhaps most painful was Elvis's knowledge that people he trusted were stealing from him. Several Memphis Mafia members had been embezzling money, taking kickbacks, and overcharging for services while pretending to be loyal friends. Even his own father, Vernon, had been having affairs and taking money from Elvis's accounts. Elvis knew about much of this theft, but felt too tired and defeated to confront it. There were also multiple claims of illegitimate children that Elvis had fathered over the years. These claims were quietly settled with money and non-disclosure agreements, ensuring that no embarrassing paternity suits would damage Elvis's image. Elvis's estate paid out significant sums to make the problems disappear. After Elvis's death, Colonel Parker moved immediately to control the narrative. He used non-disclosure agreements and outright threats to keep the Memphis Mafia members quiet. Those who showed any inclination to tell the truth were reminded of their legal obligations and warned about the financial and legal consequences of breaking their silence. Dick came to believe that their silence had real consequences beyond just hiding Elvis's story. In the decades following Elvis's death, a parade of celebrities passed away in remarkably similar circumstances. Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston, and countless others followed the same pattern of prescription substance misuse, enabling entourages and eventual overdose deaths. The culture of covering up celebrity addiction continued because no one wanted to have the honest conversation that Elvis's real story could have started. The entertainment industry patterns that took Elvis's life continue today with modern celebrities. Young stars are still thrust into fame without adequate support systems. Prescription substances are still overprescribed to keep performers working through pain and exhaustion. Entourages still enable destructive behavior because their income depends on the star continuing to perform. The same systemic failures repeat with each generation of celebrities. But Dick also wanted people to remember the real Elvis beneath all the tragedy. Elvis was genuinely kind and generous, giving away cars and money to strangers, supporting charities quietly, and treating service workers with respect. His spiritual seeking was sincere, even when his faith wavered. His talent was absolutely real, a voice and presence that could not be manufactured. His work ethic in his early career was remarkable. The man who wanted a normal life but never had a chance deserved to be remembered for his humanity, not just his failures. Dick's final message was that telling the truth honored Elvis more than maintaining lies. He believed that Elvis would want his real story told if it could help others. Dick encouraged society to have honest conversations about addiction, depression, and homicide, instead of hiding these struggles behind carefully crafted public images. He emphasized the importance of protecting actual people rather than just protecting images and brands. Elvis Presley passed away on August 16, 1977, but the full truth about that night and his final years passed away with him, locked away by men who chose legend over honesty. Until now, 30 years later, when one security guard decided that the king deserved the truth and that maybe revealing that truth could finally set everyone free. What do you think about this revelation from Dick Grob? Do you think it changes anything?